Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this video is titled The Difference Between Selling Your Home versus Buying a Home. As we jump into this video highlighting the process differences between selling your house and buying a house, I want to point out that there are a lot of similarities as we go through this process. But what I found is there are a lot of videos teaching buyers how to buy a house. And there are even videos, including ones I've made, teaching buyers how to buy another house and sell their house at the same time, or how to navigate that part of the process. But there are very few videos talking about the differences between the buying and selling process. And what I found is when people buy their first house, they don't really understand what they're getting themselves into. And maybe they have an idea, but they haven't experienced the process yet. And when you sell your house, if you've bought before, typically have some experience with the process, but you don't really know what it looks like when you're selling your house because, well, the process is different. There are a lot of similarities though, and I'll try to highlight those as we go through this video. Now I want to transition to what I think are 5 major differences between getting your house sold versus buying a house. The first difference I want to highlight is preparing your home for sale versus getting pre-approved. Okay. The first difference I want to highlight is when you sell a house, you are preparing your house for sale. When you're buying a house, you're preparing for your purchase with what we call a pre-approval. We'll start with the buying process, which you're most likely more familiar with. And on the buying process, you are working on a pre-approval. So you are, first of all, filling out a mortgage loan application. You are providing income, asset, and credit verification and documentation. And then you're receiving your pre-approval letter, which is essentially telling you what your budget is. And in that sense, you are preparing for your home purchase. And you might even be watching videos or learning about how to buy a house. When you sell your house, you are also preparing and getting ready for the sale, but it's different. When you're buying a house, you have to go through a lot of different hoops. When you're selling a house, you have different hoops to jump through. When you're preparing your house for sale, you're thinking about things like deferred maintenance. So you're addressing deferred maintenance on the inside and the outside. You're also thinking about upgrades or improvements to the inside or the outside of your house. Oftentimes, those updates and improvements are fairly minor because the goal is to maximize your return. You're also going to be thinking about staging and decluttering and maybe even moving out. So there's different things to be focusing on here. And I don't want to spend too much time on every little detail in prepping your house. I've recorded other videos on that topic, but the idea is that you're getting your house ready for sale and prepping the house versus prepping yourself for the process. The second difference I want to highlight between the home buying process and the selling process is the idea of marketing your home versus touring homes. As a buyer, you will first off have come up with some kind of a home search criteria. This would include things like your budget. This would include your neighborhoods that you like, styles of houses, bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. You get the idea. You've got your criteria. You've also, as a buyer, got your tours. So you're actually out there looking at houses, first of all, most likely online, and then you are transitioning from looking at houses online to looking at houses in person with your real estate agent. And at some point, you have to think through these different houses. What do you like about them? What would you change about them? Can you see yourself living here? And ultimately, it leads to a decision. On the selling side, you are prepping the house for sale. And then you're focusing on the marketing piece. And the prep that goes into your home sale is super, super important. But what's equally important is how it presents and how it looks online. So you, as a seller, will want to have HD photography, 3D walkthrough, video tour. You want to have everything, and you want to maximize all the different avenues that you can to make sure that your house looks great and shows great online, because if you remember as a buyer, that's where you started your search. Every little detail matters. And so the prep work matters, but so does the presentation and how it shows online. And that big marketing push is going to be pushed out when we list your house at the beginning. And typically Homes in the Seattle area right now are taking between 1 to 2 weeks to sell, and we find ourselves in a seller's market. Sometimes in a slower market, homes take longer to sell. And in some markets, homes might be on the market 30, 60, 90 days. So sometimes the time on the market is dependent on what the supply of housing versus supply of buyers looks like. But ultimately, the online presentation matters a ton when it comes to selling your house. Ultimately, as a seller, you want the hard work that you've put into prepping your house to translate into home tours. Attracting offers versus making offers is another key distinction between the home selling process and the buying process. As a home buyer, you would have gone on home tours and thought through the different benefits and drawbacks of each house, and then ultimately decided which houses you wanted to make offers on. In a more competitive market, you might have made offers on multiple houses, and in a slower market, you might have made an offer on a house and negotiated the price down. In the selling process, you spend time prepping your house, marketing your house, and now you are attracting offers. You want to, first of all, attract the right buyers to come take a look at your house and view it in person. But what you want is you want those showings to translate into offers. And that's ultimately what begins that negotiation process. And the negotiation process looks different depending on what type of market we find ourselves in. As I'm recording this video, the Seattle Bellevue market that I service is an extremely competitive market. And we call it a seller's market. So the sellers are the ones that have the control over the negotiations. And what that means is that buyers are typically trying to appeal to the seller by increasing their price, removing contingencies, and making their terms more favorable to the seller. In a buyer's market, it looks a little different. Buyers might be getting a discount on the listing price. They might be having more favorable terms for themselves in the contract, and they might include more contingencies. So depending on the market dynamics, this piece of the process looks different. On the listing side, you are attracting offers and receiving them. Closing costs is the fourth distinction that I want to highlight between selling a house and buying a house. When you're purchasing a house, many of your closing costs will fall under these categories: earnest money deposit, down payment amount, loan costs, title and escrow fees, and that's not an exhaustive list, but that's a pretty good list. You can spend additional money buying down your rate. You will have prepaid taxes and insurance, and there are a few other things in there, but typically when you're buying a house, your closing costs are going to be somewhere between 2 to 3% of the purchase price. When you are selling a home, your closing costs will be substantially larger. And I typically tell people in their minds to be thinking between 7.5% to 8% of the purchase price in closing costs. Ultimately, the amount that you pay in closing costs comes down to your agent and the fees that their firm charges, and ultimately the value that they bring to the process. And I would argue, and I think everybody would agree, that some agents bring more value to the process than others, and hence they will have larger fees than others, but that's ultimately for you as the viewer to decide. When we're looking at seller fees and costs, what we're looking at first is the agent fees. So typically a seller is paying the listing firm and also the buyer's firm via the listing firm. So there'll be this commission. A lot of times you hear 6% or 5%, and then typically whatever the commission ends up being, that's shared with the buyer's agent's firm. After agent fees, a seller is also going to pay an excise tax upon sale. So when you sell your home, you will be paying the government, and in Washington, it looks like about 1.78%. That's the old number. There is a graduated number now for excise tax calculations. Some houses are a little bit less and others are quite a bit more depending on the sales price. I don't want to spend a lot of time in this video talking about that, but I did make a video that I can link up in the description talking more about the excise tax rules and the changes in Washington state. I do joke though that the government's going to take a 1.78% commission just because they're the government, and we know they want to put their hands into the cookie jar. And so that's what that looks like in the home sale process. You can't avoid that cost. It is part of the process. If you are selling a rental property or investment property, you will also have some capital gains taxes, but those will be handled later with your accountant. Those would not be part of the home selling process. Additionally, as a seller, you will also have title and escrow costs, just like you had on the purchase. They will be relatively minor in comparison to the other costs. And you will also pay off any lienable utilities. Those are ones that could transfer over to the new buyer. Also, any unpaid or overpaid taxes will be prorated as part of the sale. So in summary, as a seller, your closing costs will be considerably higher than they will be on the buying side. The fifth and final difference between the selling process and the buying process that I want to highlight comes down to money. Sellers typically walk away with money, and buyers are typically bringing money to closing. Now, to say that all sellers walk away with money at closing is extremely simplistic because that's not true. Most people in the Seattle area who have owned their house for 3, 4, 5 years and haven't taken out additional loans or home equity lines of credit, those people are going to have enough equity in the sale of their house to walk away with money. What happens is you have your purchase price, and then you have your fees and commissions and all those things. Then you also have to pay off whatever your remaining loan balance is. And once you've paid off your loan balance and all the other fees, that is your net proceeds as a seller. And like I said, it depends on how long you've lived in the house, how much your house is appreciated in value, how much you've paid down the principal balance, etc. But that's going to be your nest egg that you walk away with. On the buying side, you are the one bringing money to closing. And unless you're in a VA situation or maybe some kind of an FHA loan where you're putting a low amount down, maybe your earnest money deposit did cover your down payment and closing costs. And in that case, you might get a small refund, but most buyers are bringing the remaining down payment that's due after their earnest money is deducted from that, and they are also paying additional closing. As we conclude this video, I hope you got a lot of value out of the differences that I highlighted between the buying process and the selling process. A few favors I'm asking here as we wrap up. Number one, if this video brought value to your life, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up so that more people can see this content and benefit from it. And if you want to see more videos like this one on buying and selling real estate, whether you're in the Seattle area or elsewhere, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe.